How do you know whether or not your team actually trusts you? Well, here are a couple receipts that will tell you one way or the other. So you say that your door is always open, but people aren't coming in. They're not visiting. They're not taking you up on that opportunity to chat, to seek guidance, to discuss about new opportunities. How about you say that you value the feedback, but when you receive it, nothing changes. Everything stays the same. And how about when you encourage your team to use PTO? Oh, no, no, no. You're hitting your max, right? Make sure to use your PTO, which is also to a sign of burnout. But every time that they do request PTO, there is a slight resentment. Maybe there's a side eye about when or how much they're using or a number of things. All of these things actually are breaking the trust. And this is not because you're communicating it badly, it's because you're lacking credibility. People are not believing the words that you're saying. And this is a broken trust issue within your team and perhaps within your organization. Now, welcome to the Generational Edge with Kristina Green podcast. I am your generational translator. We help to translate the friction in the workplace before it starts to escalate. Now, I'm also to your referee in not only in the workplace but also in the wild, right? How it is that you engage with one another in your day-to-day lives. Now, today we're talking about trust. And not this kind of overinflated version of it, but really what does that look like on a one-to-one basis on within your team? The day-to-day trust that is either being broken or cultivated on your team based on the actions that are taking place, not only as you as a leader, but also to individually amongst colleagues within the team. If your team doesn't actually believe you and they don't trust you, then whatever you're doing doesn't actually matter because they're not going to believe a word that you say. Now, let's get really down to business. So, what is the real problem here? You've actually trained them not to trust you through your actions. And how does that look like? Right? I mean, because people don't just wake up one day and be like, you know what, I don't trust her. I mean, there's an understanding that people have when they can read different situations, but trust is earned. It's not something that's given easily. But when it's broken, it can do an awful lot more harm or damage, certainly in the workplace, than it ever can support you. Because your team essentially has learned how to trust you or not, right? And while it takes time to build it, it can be broken very easily. Now, how do we get there? How do we get to this land of distrust? How do leaders actually break the trust with their teams? Well, here are a couple examples, right? You say one thing, but you do something else. So essentially, you don't even actually believe or trust yourself because you're doing something that contradicts what you said. So your team can't trust a word that you're saying because you do something completely opposite, right? It's the mismatch of actions versus the things that you're saying. How about if you're changing the direction without providing any kind of explanation? Now, no one is saying that you can't pivot, that you can't change a direction, make a different business decision, and go that direction. Well, when your team was on that train with you to go north and you decided to go south or even east or west, without providing any kind of context or explanation as to what changed, what made the decision to go south, what made that possible, right? Or made that important. So if you provide the context or the explanation behind it, then people can get back on that train with you. Otherwise, you're making a quick U-turn and your team has fallen off in the process, right? They don't even know how to continue to support you. They don't know how to stay on the train with you. How about if you are asking for input, but you're doing nothing about it? Hello, employee engagement surveys, right? How often are we part of these surveys on an annual basis and sometimes more frequently, where we're collecting your feedback, but we're doing nothing in response to it? Except for the performative measures, right? Where we mention it at a town hall or we share the results, perhaps across leadership, but it does nothing to influence our strategy. It does nothing to influence how it is that we engage with our teams. Maybe we're continuing to tolerate the same behaviors that were called out as issues or challenges in the surveys. That is another way to break trust. And how about if we're playing favorites around the accountability? So we are holding some accountable and not others, right? If there are not clear expectations around what consequences to not meeting deliverables, as an example, that are not carried out across or consistently across teammates, that is going to be a major reason why people will lose trust in what you're saying, right? Because you're holding one person accountable, but not consistently across the team. That is a way to definitely to damage your trust. So you're essentially confusing your team because they are always paying attention. They are paying attention to your actions, much like if you're a parent, your kids are watching what you're doing and they're paying attention to what you're doing more so than what you're telling them to do, right? Do as I say, not as I do type thing. That doesn't work in the work environment, also. So, and every time that your actions do not match your words, you're teaching people to not trust you, to not take you seriously, to actually not believe the words that you are saying. So here's an example of what leaders might say, but what their teams might actually hear. How about we're being transparent? I love this one. Well, this actually means we're telling you what we think that you can handle, right? So we're helping to frame your understanding of what this is. So we're just being transparent on what it is that we think that you can handle. Now, that feels like a slap in the face because how can you be transparent to me about something that I'm doing, right? This is your perception about my experience, but it's not necessarily my truth, right? Telling someone else what to expect or what to accept about their behavior, about their performance. Or how about this? We need you to stay flexible. Means that we're going to keep moving that goalpost on you, and this is kind of an unstable environment, but that's okay. Just be flexible with us, right? So, what does that flexibility actually look like? Because does it look like a target that continues to move? Does it look and feel like a goalpost that continues to be pushed back so you never can feel like you're achieving any level of success? No, those are ways that we are absolutely breaking trust. When leaders are using vague language like this, your teams are getting lost. Or how about this one? We value your input. What this means that we've actually already made a decision, but go ahead and share your thoughts, right? So it's kind of like shout into the wind if you want, but we've already made this decision. We're not going to be changing our minds. So why even request feedback? Why even look for input from a team, from your teams, from people who you say that you value in your organization if you're not going to do anything with it, right? You're wasting everyone's time. And I will get on a soapbox about the employee engagement surveys only because we know that it costs organizations an enormous amount of money, a significant amount of money. And I believe that the consulting groups who support this are really trying to support change in these organizations. It's just commonplace that many organizations, especially the larger you are, typically do not have a response strategy, right? As to how it is that they're going to take what they're learning, what they're gathering about the responses. They cannot be objective about what is being told to them about their business, and to the point where they're trying to understand, why should I even care? And most people, and I will speak for myself and others who I've been alongside when we've been completing these surveys. They're long and they sometimes can take a stupid amount of time to complete. And especially when you know that they're just basically being filed into the virtual trash, why even give you substance? Why give you a something that one you actually probably could use to swing back and hit me because it feels like these surveys are never actually anonymous. It feels like, especially when there's a free text field, especially the size of your team, you can kind of understand who is saying what on these surveys. And as a leader, you actually should be able to have a good pulse as to how your team is experiencing not only you, but the organization. Good leaders have a good understanding because they maintain a pulse of how their team is engaging, how they are experiencing their leadership and the organization. So, really, these surveys should not be telling you anything that you don't already know. They should be gathering or aggregating this data across the organization so that way, then at the higher levels, they have a better understanding as to what the themes are across the organization, right? But there should never be anything that's coming up that's new that leaders don't already anticipate on their teams. Same thing with performance reviews. Your team should understand what to expect because good leaders are constantly having that conversation. Good leaders already have a pulse on how their teams feel about the work that they're doing and how they're doing that work within the organization. If your message is changing based on the day, the situation, then these are variables that can lead to your credibility being questioned, right? So if you're not constant, if you blow in the wind and you're not a rock that stays put, that stays consistent, then your team is going to experience some level of distrust from you, right? And what does this look like generationally? And you always know my disclaimer. Listen, we only use the generations as a understanding and awareness to understand how people might be showing up based on the foundational values that they carry with them, right? So what does this look like for Gen X as an example? So how they receive the trust is that they may clock this as inconsistency. If you are constantly moving in the wind and the priorities are changing, they may start to disengage because they just can't be bothered with managing your left and right swing all the time, right? How about millennials may be looking for clarity, but then all of a sudden feel the backlash because they feel like they're being labeled as difficult simply for having questions. And Gen Z, how about this? They're going to test you. They're going to test you to whether or not you're truly committed to exactly what you're saying is the new priority. And they're going to do that fast because they're also too going to check out quickly, right? They're going to clock that very quickly and it's going to feel abrasive. But look, they're just looking to stop wasting time, not only theirs, but yours and others who are on the team. So each of these generations essentially is bringing a challenge that we need as leaders. One, to be committed, to be consistent, to be clear, and to identify what success metrics actually look like, to set expectations clearly. Now let's get into why it is that they don't believe you, right? And we got to be really honest with this one because this sugarcoating nonsense is not getting anybody further. In fact, it's just gaslighting us as leaders and as employees across every industry. So if you overpromise just to keep people calm, you're people pleasing, you're appeasing them as opposed to having the difficult conversation or standing your ground and being clear on what it is that you believe, what the strategy is, the vision is, right? That is what we do as leaders. We have to stand our ground and also to be open to receiving that feedback because it doesn't mean that we always have the right answer. But if we move if we move left and right according to whatever anyone says, then that's going to create a layer of an element of distrust. You underexplain when things start to change, which might reveal that you don't actually understand what the new direction is, right? Or maybe you're not fully bought into it. So if you can't sell it to your team, because you haven't even sold it to yourself. It's not something that you believe yet. So you lean into providing less clarity than more clarity. So people have more questions than they have answers, right? You're leaving that gap for them to fill because they will absolutely fill the gaps that you're not providing to them about the why. You're avoiding hard conversations. So when we know that things are changing, when we know that there is something, a conversation around performance that needs to be had, and we're avoiding that, that's when your team is just not believing you because you're not saying the quiet part out loud or the honest part out loud, right? Hard conversations is just part of being a good leader. Back to this idea of moving in the wind. You only enforce rules based on your mood, based on the mood of the team, right? It's not standard, it's not consistent. That's not how you build a psychologically safe team. You don't build a psychologically safe environment where people can actually share and be honest and also to be themselves, including yourself, because you're inconsistent with how it is that you are applying the standards, applying the rules, applying the consequences across your team. That creates uncertainty and distrust on your team. Now, we've been talking an awful lot about trust, but let's start to peel this back and decode it across the generations. So it's important that we understand how each of the generations shows up or interprets this concept of trust in the work environment, right? So just using 4 generations, how the baby boomers might interpret trust in the work environment, you have to understand the context in which their careers were being shaped, right? So, baby boomers believe in doing what it is that you said that you're going to do, keeping your word. Now, remember, early on in their career, a lot of business was understood based on your word is your bond, right? There were business deals that were closed over just a verbal agreement, over a handshake. These things were real. Now, where today there are people who may not necessarily tell the truth, it was a value that the baby boomers grew into, not only in their childhood, but also too was part of the workplace. So if you said you were going to do something, that trust was built based on you did what you said you were going to do. And that is a value that they may carry today and bring to their environment into their work relationships today. Now, Gen X might view trust as, listen, it's trusting that I can execute, that I can get done the job that you have hired me to do, that you have appointed me to do. So you won't waste my time by micromanaging me. You will trust that I am capable, that I can get us to the finish line, that I can do these things that you have asked me to do, right? So remember, when Gen X is known as being the most resilient, hands-off generation, if you will, in the workplace today, and Gen X earned that reputation based on the hands-off experience they had during their childhood. To overmanage or to micromanage Gen X in the work environment, that feels like distrust. So if you distrust their ability to execute, then why should they trust your ability to be consistent and to manage them? For millennials, trust might look like helping them to understand the bigger picture, the context, the concept of what needs to be done, the decisions that are driving these new initiatives, new programs. So how are they to step into that space, give them the bigger picture understanding and provide them with the guidance that they need so that way they can be successful, because that's the end goal for the millennials, is that they're trying to be successful. They're trying to make good on what was requested of them, but they have to be able to have a greater understanding of the concept behind it. With Gen Z, the trust is built based on you showing up authentically, right? Telling them what needs to be done, allowing them the space to be able to seek clarity and get answers to their questions, but not showing up in a different way just because you feel that that's what they want to hear. That's disingenuine and they're not about that, right? So don't waste anybody's time by placating them. Give them what they need, show up correct, and don't do this whispering nonsense behind their back. There's a saying in parenting psychology that I hear often, that you may have multiple children, but they do not all experience the same parent, right? And so we have to be cognizant about how we bring that into our workplace, into our leadership as well. Because if your team is experiencing you, or everyone on your team is experiencing you differently, especially dependent on the day or the initiative or whatever is going on, you have to be more cognizant about ensuring that you are building the trust within your team. Otherwise, you are absolutely breaking it. So start by this. Ask your team, what actually builds trust for them, right? And this doesn't necessarily have to be from your leadership style. How do they build trust with others? How do they how do they understand when others have built trust with them, right? What were the steps, the process? What did that look like? And then take that feedback and apply it to how it is that you are leading them. Are you showing up for them in the way that they need in order to feel trusted, and for you to and for them, excuse me, are you leading in a way that allows them to feel trusted in your environment and for them to trust you as their leader? How do we start to fix the trust or the distrust that might exist on our teams? How do we intentionally lean in to ensure that our teams can trust us as leaders? Here are a couple tips on how to start leaning in intentionally to build the trust on your team. So, one, stop over explaining, right? So lean into providing the enough information to get people going. Give them the space to ask questions, to seek guidance from you, but do not manage the how, manage the what. The expectation is that the result is X. Be clear about what that is, and then just follow through along the way. Second, say less and do more. This is not about giving grand speeches about all of the things that need to be completed. This is not about leading with the energy of do as I say and not as I do. This is letting your actions speak for yourself, right? So speaking less about what you're going to do and demonstrating about what it is you are doing. Explain the decisions before you allow people to start guessing about what it is that you're doing. Okay. This is where we have to be able, especially when we are pivoting, we have to be able to explain how decisions are made, right? Let people be able to anticipate that if there's a shift, it's because of one of three things has happened, right? Maybe budget, maybe resources, a number of things. When you can provide that transparency, then you're already speaking into the narrative that they were going to build in their head anyway. Instead, provide them with the explanation. Help them to understand how it is that you've gotten to the decision that was made. And next, be consistent even when it's inconvenient. So if you say that you're going to hold a feedback session, right, across your teams on a monthly or quarterly basis, and you get off to a good start and it happens for a couple months or a couple quarters, and then it drops off. If you can be transparent about why you're not going to hold them any longer, or about why there might be a break, then you're filling in the gaps that they may have for the reasons, right? But if you're going to do this and you just ghost your team and no longer host them, the narrative might build in their head might be, oh, they received too much feedback or real honest feedback that they couldn't handle, and so then they stopped to holding these meetings. When the reality could be that the time constraints around business decisions and deliverables became too constrained, that holding this forum, right, appeared to be a waste of time, right? Or collectively a waste of time because only 3 people out of 25 were the people who were speaking up. Help them to understand the narrative, but be consistent. If you're going to commit to something, then be consistent in that commitment. And if you can't be consistent, then don't state a consistency. Don't state a commitment that you can't uphold, right? Instead, say, we're going to hold these ad hoc, or we're going to maybe dive into them twice a year, right? Provide the consistency that they can anticipate. Now, trust isn't built when things are easy. We know that trust is built when people are under pressure because that is when people are watching. You've been listening to the Generational Edge with Christina Green podcast, your generational translator. Now, if your team doesn't believe you, it's not necessarily a personality issue. It could just be a pattern in credibility and how it is that you're showing up, and maybe how your leader is showing up. So, and if today's episode has felt a little close to home, then like, share, and or subscribe because we don't tiptoe around the generational issues in the workplace. We face it head on to provide organizations and leaders with the tools to be able to navigate this space. So, in the meantime, thank you for joining and take care of yourself. We'll see you on the next one.